The Unmarked by Matt Fleagle. Chapter 2. The Empty Chair. Behind the village storehouse, Kaleb tossed the last of the tilbury logs onto a haphazard pile of wood. He hunched his shoulders down and lifted the long handles of the lightened cart onto his back. As he did, a thickly bearded man appeared from around the side of the storehouse with an open palm full of coins. He was chubby. His tunic was stained with sweat streaks. He squinted up at Kaleb, who, besides being powerfully built, was one of the tallest persons in Glenwood Village. The filthy man coughed loudly and wiped his mouth with the back of his forearm. "Here's what I owe you," he said, tossing the coins in Kaleb's direction. Kaleb caught most of them, but as he leapt forward to retrieve the coins, the timber cart precariously balanced on his back slid off onto the ground with a crash, nearly separating one wheel of the cart from its axle. Kaleb groaned quietly. Then he crouched to retrieve the rest of the coins scattered around the base of the timber pile. "I expect you won't be attending the banquet tonight," said the bearded man. Kaleb shook his head. "It's a shame, you know," the man said, casting a glance up and down the length of Kaleb's powerful body. "There'd be girls eager to dance with a strong lad like you, I wager." He snorted, then wiped his nose with the back of his left hand. "But I guess there's no getting around this here, is there, lad?" The bearded man, whose name was Lineage, held a stubby finger up to the dark, intricate mark emblazoned upon his forehead, just between and above his eyes. Kaleb looked down at the wood chips by his feet. He hoped his silence would prompt the man to end the conversation. "Well, I guess you better be getting back to that little hovel of yours. The market will be closing soon, what with the banquet and all, so I'd get my food now if I were you." Kaleb turned around and hoisted the cart handles back onto his shoulders, after reattaching the loose wheel to the cart. "Thank you, sir," he muttered to Lineage. "Hey, keep your head up, boy," the man said. "You know we always leave an empty chair out for you at the banquet, in keeping with the elders' traditions." As fast as he could manage with a large cart hunching him over, Kaleb retreated from the storehouse and made his way toward the village market. On his way there, he did his best to conceal the angry tears that slid down between the creases of his flushed cheeks. Kaleb passed familiar faces along the way, villagers he rarely spoke to, but had sometimes fantasized about conversing with, were he not an unmarked. For each of the people he passed was marked, all but him. Every face in the crowd boasted a small, ornate symbol just above and between their blue eyes that allowed them access to Glenwood's community, to its conversations, to its traditions, banquets, jokes, and meetings. But not Kaleb Dellblood. For him, all these citizens of Glenwood Village would remain strangers until the day he died. It had been this way since Kaleb's 12th birthday, when a select party of villagers, including his own father, escorted him out of the village and to the tiny hovel at the edge of Greenwich Wood reserved for unmarks. Except to drop off freshly cut tilbury logs twice a day, Kaleb was barred from all community activities. He had not even been permitted to attend his father's funeral 3 winters before, though one kind villager had discreetly notified Kaleb of his old man's passing. Otherwise, Kaleb would never have known. To the Dellbloods, an unmarked was bad luck, a walking taboo. Kaleb's only consolation as an unmarked was that village laws, drawn from ancient, unexplained customs, forbade any marked villager from ever harming him. The villagers were not, however, forbidden from mocking Kaleb or ignoring him. Kaleb had now reached the other end of town, where the market teemed with eager customers and vendors, as it did every afternoon. As he turned a corner that led into the market square, a woman holding an infant child bumped into his lumber cart while rushing the opposite way. She swiveled to face Kaleb, whose cart had nearly toppled over from the impact. "Oh, I'm very sorry," she began, but her loud apology dwindled to a mumble a second later. Her eyes settled on Kaleb's forehead. The embarrassed smile disappeared from her broad face. Clearing her throat loudly, the woman pulled the edge of the baby's swaddling cloth over its face, as though protecting her infant from the glare of a garish sun. Without another word, she shuffled past Kaleb and back into the village crowd. Kaleb bowed his head and continued with his cart into the wide, noisy market square. As he passed through the busy hub of villagers, the crowd around him parted like a mass of healthy pedestrians avoiding a leper. When he reached the market counter, Kaleb heaved the cart off his shoulders and lowered it to the ground. He signaled for one of the vendors, a young woman named Madge, to assist him. Kaleb preferred Madge's help, though she was often engaged with other customers. Madge drew a great deal of attention from the Dellblood men for being, without exception, the town's most beautiful young woman. Her skin, like most of the villagers, was a dark creamy color, but the contours of her face were sharp, unlike other Dellbloods. Her eyes were a deep brown, darker than the freshly tilled soil churned up by the villagers in planting season, just after the life-giving spring rains softened the earth. Most of the Dellbloods, including Kaleb, had light blue eyes. For this reason, Madge was a darling of many of the aging villagers, who considered her brown eyes a good omen from the forest spirit of rich harvest to come. And by the same token, Madge found herself constantly swarmed by love-struck suitors clamoring to make this woman of singular beauty their wife. For Kaleb, however, Madge's beauty paled against her other virtues. What stirred Kaleb's affection for the girl was that Madge had always spoken to Kaleb, and even looked at Kaleb differently than her fellow marked villagers. Madge spoke to Kaleb in the sweet, enthusiastic way village children often talked to him. That is, until the elders explained to them that Kaleb was an unmarked, and by tradition should not be spoken to. From that point on, children averted their eyes from his when they crossed paths with him in the village streets or on a forest path. But Madge's face met his with something like compassion and a kind of understanding. Perhaps as a fellow object of curiosity, she knew what it meant to be different, and pitied that his differences led to an exile, while hers offered her celebrity. And that's why the best part of Kaleb's day, every day, were the fleeting moments he spent exchanging a timid greeting and a few paltry coins with the young girl at the market counter. "Hello, Kaleb," Madge said, smiling at him. "What would you like today?" Kaleb quickly retrieved the few coins he had earned that afternoon from inside of his tunic and handed them to her. 5 orchid fruits and 2 portions of grinnell nut milk, please," he said, placing the coins on the table. His eyes flitted from her dark, uniquely contoured face back to his cracked, calloused hands. He thrust them under the counter, out of her sight. Madge selected the fruits from a bunch laid out on a wooden counter behind her. Kaleb watched her sort through the fruits, setting aside the bruised and discolored ones, and picking up 3 of the choicest pieces for him. She turned to hand them back to Kaleb. "There you are," she said. "Anything else?" "Just the milk, please," Kaleb said, smiling. "Oh, yes, of course, the milk, I almost forgot." She picked up a wooden cup full of watery milk and placed it on the counter in front of him. "Thanks," said Kaleb, turning away from her with the fruits tucked under his arms. "You're always welcome," she said. A moment later, Madge's father barked an order from behind the fruit and vegetable counter for her to come help him move some buckets of nut milk. Kaleb hoisted the empty cart back onto his shoulders. He resisted the temptation to look back at Madge as he took the first step of an arduous trek back toward his tiny hovel outside the village. Only a few steps down the forest trail that led out of Glenwood Village, however, Kaleb heard a blood-curdling scream. The terror in the voice punctuated the smothering afternoon air. Moments later, frantic voices swelled up around Kaleb, each asking who the voice belonged to. The market was thrown into sudden turmoil, with some running toward the voice, and others herding their children away from it.